impairment on the roads. Other thing I want to talk about is the safety for our families and children, right? And the former speaker spoke so eloquently to that. Okay? When you talk to people about the fact that 80% of Colorado's medical marijuana dispensaries and 70% of all of Colorado's marijuana dispensaries are recommending marijuana to pregnant mothers in their first trimester, jaws hit the floor. Okay, we just had a study come out yesterday that found that your chances of preeclampsia, of a whole host of very high-risk pregnancy-threatening conditions, it goes through the roof when you use marijuana during pregnancy, during that first trimester. We have seen babies die in the womb from the use of marijuana during pregnancy. Okay, so it is a huge public health concern. The Academy of Pediatrics has spoken against this. Every medical association has spoken about this, but the industry is doing that. And I think it's really important to call out the elephant in the room. 83% of these medical dispensaries that are medical, we politically voted in this state and in other states to say this is medicine. There are no doctors and clinicians that are telling these women, hey, this is what I recommend. Because no doctor or clinician would do that. There are bud tenders in these places that are saying this strain of marijuana is going to help you with your pregnancy. It's going to help with the nausea in your first trimester. Okay, so, we're in a place where there's a dearth of science. The public are being misled by people who have a profit motive. They are for-profit companies selling these drugs. They are not there as nonprofits to educate them on the public health nuances of using this substance during pregnancy. That's not what they're here for. That's why we rely on folks like you who have that credibility, who can speak and say, this is the facts, folks. This is the facts. Make your own decisions, get informed, but these are the facts about today's marijuana, and these are the facts about this industry. So I want to make sure that you all know where these resources are. We are basically, you can scan this with your phone. Our job is essentially to educate decision makers like yourselves. We have one sheets. We have a giant report that's got hundreds of more studies and information, all of it the latest stuff that's reviewed by our science advisors. Please check that out. I think it's just really important to get that information. And so I wanted, how are we doing on time? Are we doing good on time? Okay, great. So I want to get into this. Okay, so I talked about the polling, right? Now, the public right now is being misled. There is a false dichotomy when it comes to this issue. It's either lock everybody up, that's what they think, we're locking everybody up, even though you all know that this isn't the case. I think there's been an analysis done here in Florida, but I'll just give a recent example. In Michigan, the top performing ad for the legalization campaign in Michigan said, it was a former cop, and he said, we're just locking away so many people for just a joint. And, I would love to stop doing that. And we looked at the statistics, and there were 11 people in the state of Michigan's prisons that had where their charge had anything to do with marijuana possession. 11 people. Okay. The perception is that there's hundreds of thousands of people languishing in prisons. Okay. It's not the case. Okay. But perception is reality for folks. And so they think we're either going to incarcerate or we're going to legalize. And in fact, there's just so many other policy nuances that we can have, that can be done. So we think of this as three different buckets, right? So the first bucket is the penalization of low-level use. Okay. So we've talked a little bit about that. Then there's the medical discussion, right? And so people think that, what's out there is medicine. But the fact is this plant has 500 different components. Some of those components are being tested by the FDA right now. There are clinical trials that are happening to assess the medical benefit. Now, I don't know if you all know this, but the FDA has approved THC, that's the ingredient that gets you high, for medicine. You can get a prescription for Marinol, which is pure THC, today for certain ailments from your doctor. Also, CBD, I think we're all familiar with CBD. It does not get you high. There's Epidiolex. That is a CBD medical product that has been approved by the FDA. You can get a prescription for. Okay, so we have a legitimate process for medicine that we've used for a century in this country. Not been perfect, but it resulted in some of the most incredible innovations in medical science the world has ever seen. And they are reviewing this plant and its various components. But this idea that you're going to smoke your medicine, that we're going to have joints and that will be medicine. Okay, it's really important that we break out the medical discussion from recreational, because there are a lot of people out there who say, vote and legalize recreational marijuana because it's medicine. Well, here in Florida, you have a medical marijuana program already. So if your concern is about medicine, that program already exists for better or for worse, right? So I think it's really important to tell the public, don't just say, okay, this is medicine, so now we're going to legalize it for recreational use. Those are two completely different subjects, all right? And then, of course, the third bucket is, as I talked about, recreational sales. So it's really important we split those things apart. So 2019, for the first time in 40 years, U.S. Surgeon General Dr. Jerome Adams issued an advisory on marijuana. First time in 40 years that Surgeon General's office issued an advisory on that. Said marijuana today is a much more dangerous drug than it has ever been, and that the two populations he's most concerned about are pregnant mothers using this substance as well as youth. So we are seeing unprecedented rises in those two demographics in this country. And again, that is being driven by a profit industry that is normalizing this drug because it's been allowed to, okay? Biden's current Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek Murthy, also very concerned about this trend of marijuana legalization. He said, public policy is outpacing the science when it comes to marijuana. And he's concerned about the fact that more youth are becoming addicted to this substance. Okay, so this is not a partisan issue, and our nation's past two top doctors have raised the alarm about this. So what are we concerned about? I've talked about industry. I want to be really specific about it. Okay, so you all are seeing in the microcosm here in Florida with one company spending millions of dollars to get this done. Where do they want to go? They want this to look like big tobacco. The pitch deck from the marijuana industry to Congress was leaked, and you can check it out in the Daily Beast. And what they're asking for is to look just like big tobacco, with an oligopoly, that's their words, couple of small players that own everything, just like Philip Morris, just like R.J. Reynolds and all of that. They want the marijuana industry to look just like that. Okay, so we're very concerned about that because of the millions of people who have paid the price for what we learned with tobacco. And speaking of tobacco, largest company in America, largest tobacco company in America, Altria, they have invested billions of dollars into the marijuana industry. Okay, so we are talking about big tobacco players. And it's funny, when we started, you could probably see in our little motto underneath our logo there, preventing another big tobacco. We thought they would be like tobacco. We didn't think they would actually become tobacco. But tobacco has completely carved this industry up. And so they're talking about this now. It's in the news and media. We've been calling it out for a decade. Now they're starting to wake up to the fact that this is tobacco all over again. Not just tobacco, alcohol as well. Constellation Brands is the largest alcohol conglomerate. They've got $14 billion into this industry. You can see their THC-infused beverages. Okay, so let's not fool ourselves and think that, I think there's a school of thought out there that, we'll just legalize marijuana. People are going to make their own decisions. It's going to be an individual rights issue. Trust me when I say this. These industries have a great track record of making their products very appealing to our youth and to broader demographics. Okay, and we just need to look no further than vaping, right? Vaping has made smoking cool again. That's only possible because we have a capitalist society, which is a beautiful thing. Companies are able to innovate, make products more available, make them more pleasurable to use, and make them more accessible. That's a great thing when it's something that helps solve problems. It's not a great thing when it's something that creates problems. Problems that you all have to deal with in your communities, and you know what I'm talking about. It is their job to make these addictive substances much more available, much easier to use. And you know what that means when it's a drug like marijuana or something else? It means more addiction. And it means addiction has never become easier. And they make a profit from that. They are incentivized by it. So what then happens from there? Their profit incentive drives them to make it more normalized in society. So we have, and this exists in Florida, we just looked at the language, state exemptions to the Clean Indoor Air Act. So in Colorado, for example, you can have a smoker section in our hotels, restaurants, and lounges for joints. But guess what you can't have a smoker section for, folks? Cigarettes. So we're in the twilight zone of public health policy. Okay, it's almost like we're, taking the replay of big tobacco's rise from the 1950s, and we're just rewatching it in slow motion. And we know where this story is going. We know where this ends. And yet we're watching it play out before us. Then the industry does things like this. They hire the best lobbyists and lawyers. Okay, and the former speaker knows all about this. He had plenty of lawyers and lobbyists in his office, I'm sure. And they're all very, very smart, and they've got Ivy degrees and all that. And they say, well, guess what we just discovered? In Oregon and California, the legal definitions in the marijuana law don't define pre-K and kindergartens as schools. So we're going to set up dispensaries near pre-Ks and kindergarten schools. Okay, so we had an advocate send us this picture and say, what can you do to help us? So my point is not to demonize the people that are in this industry. I don't think they all want to go after our kids and, all this stuff. My point is that it doesn't matter what their intentions are. They have a profit incentive. They are for-profit companies responsible to their shareholders to return an investment to their shareholders. My background's in healthcare technology. I actually started a company and I sold it. And what I will tell you is, we had VC firms, and they were thinking about putting a lot of money into our company. They wanted a 10x return. So what do you do when you have a hedge fund put $100 million into a marijuana company, and they want a 10x return? You got to sell a ton of that product. And if folks are addicted, and they're coming in and using 5-6 times a day, so be it, because that drives the profit margins. Doesn't matter what your intentions are. Speaking of intentions, it doesn't matter what the intentions are of the people who write the laws. The laws create an understanding in society that this is allowable, right? And then we have to deal with the unintended consequences that law cannot control for. Okay, we can't put a sheriff's deputy on every single street corner in Florida, make sure people abide by the rules of no public use of marijuana. I learned that the hard way as a parent in Colorado when my wife and we then had one daughter, 10 months old, walking her in her stroller down the street in our community. Somebody lights up a joint, and the secondhand marijuana smoke engulfs my daughter's stroller as she's sleeping. And she's breathing that in. And my wife turns to me and she says, you know, that happens every single time we take her out for a walk in this neighborhood. That is not normal. Those are things we can't control for. Those are policies that we have made our deal with the devil, so to speak. We've said this is going to be allowable. We can't enforce anti-public smoking laws every single place that it happens in our state. We have to deal with those consequences. Okay, so it's really, really important we understand that. You know, OxyContin, the CEO who wrote OxyContin's marketing playbook, he's in the marijuana industry as well. He runs a medical marijuana company. Okay, so these are the players that are behind the scenes, pushing this, investing in this, wanting to make a profit off of this. Okay, and so I mentioned hedge funds. This is the first marijuana hedge fund. These are the guys, you know, Yale, Harvard, MBAs. Let's just be clear too, by the way, this is not some civil rights movement. Okay, this is not being run by people who have a strong track record in fighting for equal rights. Okay, these are guys who just want to make money, right? They're guys who want to make money, who have strong business backgrounds, and that's what this is ultimately about. So I mentioned people think that this is what marijuana is today. These are state legal, regulated, quote-unquote, products. Totally not targeting our kids with those cannabis-infused pink lemonade gummies, with the sodas and the ice creams. Okay, you say, well, guess what? We're going to control for this. We're going to write the law in a way where it's illegal to target kids, right? That sounds really sensible. Well, that exists in every single state that has legalized marijuana, the protection for kids. And yet we still have products like this that get approved. And why? Because they have the best lobbyists and the best lawyers, and they're able to dance dances all around the text that's in these regulations. Okay, so these products still proliferate. And it's this that we have to tell our communities about. It's this that you have to tell your constituents about. And I think it's so important to have the Florida Sheriff's Association come together and say, look, you know, we're not, you know, we can't get involved in the politics. We can't tell people how to vote and all that stuff. But guess what? We're going to tell people these are the facts, right? If you do this, this is what Colorado's seeing. This is what Oregon's seeing. This is what these other states are seeing. This is what you can expect it to look like. And we want you to be educated. And as your members of law enforcement, we're going to tell you what the impact's going to be on us. And the fact of the matter is, it is not going to set us free and liberate our resources, right? It's going to require more. How are we doing on time? Are we good, Matt? 3 minutes? Okay, great. All right, you get 3 more minutes with me, and then you can say, that guy from Colorado, he talks so fast and spat out all this marijuana stuff at us, and now we're just going to try to forget it all. So I talked about potency. I mentioned it's up to 99%. This is what these products look like. Okay, shatters, waxes. How many of you, show of hands, how many of you know what dabbing is? Dabbing. You guys know what that is? Got a couple of hands? All right. My neighbor, Laura Stack, Colorado, had a horrible way of learning what dabbing is, because it's the most popular way now that youth are using today's high-potency marijuana. What it involves is a little bit of shatter, like what you see there, very small little amount of very high-potency THC, okay, 99% usually. It's vaporized and inhaled, and you get very, very, very high, very, very fast. She learned what this was in the worst possible way because her son, Johnny Stack, dabbed marijuana with a state-legal medical marijuana card that he was given under the state's legal apparatus in Colorado to treat his anxiety, even though scientifically it does the reverse, it makes anxiety worse. And he went to the parking garage 2 miles from where I live and jumped off the top floor of it and died. That was 3 years ago. Laura Stack now has Johnny's Ambassadors, where she does a parent walk in that area to educate parents on what dabbing is. Okay? So the fact that most of the country, and you all are a reflection of the country's knowledge here, most people don't know what dabbing is. But yet in Colorado, it's one of the top ways that our youth are using this drug. Okay, so people are not going into the ballot box with an informed opinion on this substance. So don't think that this is just a foregone conclusion and the decision's been made and people are going to vote for it because they know what they're getting into. They don't. And they need to hear from folks like you who can bring that expertise and that understanding to educate them. Okay, so we're not just talking about more people using. That's obviously one concern, and there are a lot more people experimenting. We're also talking about an increase in the consumption. Okay, so what do I mean by that? The average marijuana user, this was an example given by a prominent researcher, okay? So he said basically the average person was using marijuana on a daily basis. It was like a 20-ounce cola of caffeine. Well, now that consumption has risen to a level of 33 Starbucks cappuccinos worth of caffeine. That's the example for THC consumption. Okay, so 33 cappuccinos. Imagine consuming that just in caffeine per day. You might die from that. Okay, is that much more consumption for the average user when it comes to marijuana? Okay, so the consumption is really key. I talked about the addiction. Mental health. Okay, so I talked about how we have an industry. They have changed this drug. It's more potent than it's ever been. It's more addictive than it's ever been. Final big change with this drug that I really want you to walk away with, and this is something that I think you could emphasize in the things that you say if you decide to do that. We're happy to help. Is this drug is more harmful to your mental health than it's ever been. Okay, so schizophrenia, psychosis, you are 5 times more likely to develop schizophrenia with using today's high-potency marijuana than you are if you don't. Okay, so the mental health connection, the research again and again shows us that. You look at these two graphs, right? Red graph on the left there. The number of times you use marijuana in your lifetime dramatically increases your risk of developing schizophrenia. Okay, so up to 28 times, then you're looking at over 50 times, 28 per 1,000 people. That's a pretty big rate of schizophrenia when you talk about marijuana use. And then you look at by the age you start. So by 15 years of age, you see in that purple graph, by 15, you're 4.5 times more likely. If you can get them to 18, a little less likely, right? So when we talk about targeting youth, that's where the rubber meets the road. Somebody starting marijuana use in their youth. Oh, and by the way, I actually love this one. Let's legalize marijuana so, we'll get rid of the dealers. The youth won't use it because they'll be carded at the store. Just like alcohol and tobacco, right? I went to public high school. Alcohol and tobacco flowed like water through my school. I don't know about y'all. So yeah, marijuana, legal, doesn't really encourage me when I think about the access for our kids. Okay, so I hope you found this helpful. I hope you found this informative. I want to thank you for the great work you're doing in your communities. The last thing I'll say is this. I had the opportunity in the aftermath of George Floyd to join my police chief's advisory board. Citizen advisory board, they wanted to open up basically help our people in our town get more educated about what's happening in law enforcement. So me and a whole bunch of other members of our community, we joined that group. We're there, and everybody was really hot to trot about, let's see how you're hiring officers. Let's see how you're training them. Let's see, what you're doing to kind of select officers and all that. And I'll never forget, everyone kind of had the knives out, wanting to learn, the gotcha moment. And so the police chief said, great, let's do that. Walks us through how they choose an officer. Spends a whole day, probably 3 hours talking through that process of selection. And I'll never forget when he finished it, the psych evaluation, the fact that the vast majority of these applications are rejected, just the level of granularity of understanding the people that they're hiring to be in law enforcement, to serve our community. He gets to the end of it, and everyone sitting around that table who was ready to have their gotcha moment, he goes, what recommendations would you have for us to improve this process? Not a word was spoken. And people said, wow, I don't even think I could qualify for a job like this. And so what that told me is how important what you do is and how valuable you men and women in law enforcement are. And I think, they say all politics is local. When people understand law enforcement at the local level, it comes up to the national level. So I want to thank you all so much. God bless you. Thank you for your service, and I hope this has been helpful.
Thank you, Luke. Sheriffs, now you know the rest of the story. We got to fight this with all our might. You think we're dealing with issues now in the drug industry? If this passes, you ain't seen nothing yet. If any of you watched the Republican National Convention last week, you've seen our governor, Ron DeSantis, and his speech, he slayed it. Our governor is not only a champion for law and order, but he's a sheriff's friend. And I would like to introduce you to the governor of the free state of Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's great to be at the Sheriff's Conference. Thank you for all you do. You know, there's we talk about different statistics about Florida this, and I'll talk about some of those. But sometimes just little stories tell the tale. And so some of you may have seen this. I think it was a couple months ago. CNN, of all places, was investigating these. They were illegal aliens that would create criminal rings, and they were stealing and looting a lot of places in New York City. And it turned out that when they would get the proceeds of this, they would want to try to come to Florida to spend the money. And so someone on CNN asked, well, why don't you steal in Florida? They said, because in Florida, they put you in jail for doing that. And so they didn't want anything to do with it. And I think that that's something that, that really shows, you know, the differences. And if you look around the country, you know, you got to have good policies. I mean, you guys have so many great people working for you and your leadership. But if we started enacting Illinois or California or New York policies, you guys would get kneecapped very quickly. Illinois, for example, they abolished cash bail, making it easier for dangerous criminals to get out on the street after an arrest. And this is after that had already been done and failed in places like New York, and they still went and did it. Los Angeles defunded police by $175 million. San Francisco has reduced by $120 million for police budget. NYPD has gone $1 billion due to budget cuts. This is all basically since 2020 that's happened. Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. You know, say what you want about it. It used to be a clean and relatively orderly city back in the day. Now, from 22 to 23, which is the latest statistics we have, homicides up 37%, motor vehicle theft up 103%, robberies up 70%, and violent crime up 40%. And this is estimated to cost D.C. $3.2 billion annually, which, of course, falls on criminals, or falls on the taxpayers and not the criminals. And so we've seen examples of what's happened. We've done the opposite in Florida, and we're better off for doing the opposite in Florida. We have done things with funding. Now, you know, our budget in Florida, some of you have already come up to me and thanked me for different things, and, you know, we had to go through these line items, and my view is that when you budget, you're not just budgeting for the year in question, but you've got to think about what's going to be in 5 years or 10 years or 15 or 20. Very few people in elective office actually think that way. That's part of the reason we're $34 trillion in debt in D.C. You know, but my view is you know, we want to be sound fiscally for a generation. So this year's budget came in, and I had to do some budget vetoes, but we actually spent less than we did last year. And I think we're probably the only state in America, or one of the few, who's actually reducing spending. Yet, while we were doing that, we had record funding for education, record funding for teacher pay. We had record support for Everglades restoration, record support for transportation and roads and bridges, which is important, and huge support for law enforcement and a number of different programs that we've been able to do. And so we have a massive budget surplus. Since I've become governor, the Florida's debt from the 1800s until the present that I inherited, we've paid off 36% of that in 5.5 years. So, and we're going to do a lot more over the next 2.5. So that means by having big surplus, we've, I think, tripled or quadrupled our rainy day fund since I've been governor. What that means is, if something happens with the national economy, if you had some type of big crash, and, you know, you never know, these things can happen. If things start going haywire, Florida, you're going to be fine. You know, we have the funds, we do what we need to do, and we keep all the core functions of government working just fine. And that's really what it should be. A lot of these states that are doing poorly, you know, they're not even fiscally solvent as is. And so if anything more happens, they're going to be in big trouble. But just with some of the things we've done, we've had this law enforcement recruitment program to give people $5,000 after taxes to new recruits who relocate from other states, or the young people that decide to do. You know, a lot of people don't talk about that. They focus on, oh yeah, this person's fleeing Seattle because it's such a dumpster fire to come to Florida, and they get $5,000, and that's a win for Florida. And it is. Chicago, New York. I mean, you guys have these folks in your agencies, but the majority of those $5,000 checks are people that are new to law enforcement, that are choosing law enforcement as a career. And we thought that was important because law enforcement's come under attack, and we want to show people that it's a noble calling and it's a good career. And in Florida, I think it is a great career. Honestly, like, I would not recommend, if some young person came to me in like Chicago and said, should I join in Chicago? I would say no. Like, why would you put yourself in that situation? They come to me in Florida and say you should join. I'd say absolutely you should join. You'll be able to serve the community. You'll be able to have support from the community, and you'll be able to make a difference. And so all these things matter. So that $5,000 is important. Obviously, things aren't getting any cheaper in this country, and so it just helps because you're not going to be a millionaire working in law enforcement. But I think it's more of just the symbol that says, you know, the state of Florida really values this, and we're willing to cut a check for $5,000. And through that program, we've welcomed nearly 1,400 new recruits from different states and territories. Of course, the biggest chunk is from New York, Illinois, and California. And I'll never forget being in California a couple years ago. You know, I land, you know, I get greeted by a police chief of a nice area in Southern California. And I was like, how's it going? He's like, I'm doing great. Just all my officers want to move to Florida now. And so, like, you know, Southern California, that used to be the place everyone wanted to go. And if they had sane policies, that probably would still be the place everyone would want to go because it's a beautiful area. But that's just what you're doing. So we've seen that. And we've awarded $36 million to date just in that program. So that's something we launched a few years ago when I was governor. And we're going to continue to do that because it's been very successful. You know, we also, during the COVID, the 2 or 3 years during COVID, we were trying to, okay, they're defunding police other places. We're not going to do that. But we did $1,000 bonuses for every single sworn law enforcement officer for 3 years in a row in the state of Florida. I mean, that's a big, big deal, and we're really proud of that. We've also enacted really strong policies. In 2021, on the heels of some of the worst riots in the modern history of the country, we passed anti-rioting legislation, which did a number of things. One is it prevented local governments from defunding law enforcement. And the reason why is because, like, why would I let them cut off their nose to spite their face? It's like you could have 5 people on some city council and 3 of them, you know, want to indulge in this idiocy. Why should the citizens of their municipality have to bear the brunt of those dumb decisions? And so we say we'll be able to restore the funding. So defund the police is a total non-factor in the state of Florida because of the actions that we've taken. We now have the ability, and in that law, we also gave protections for law enforcement to be able to defend against riots, and we got sued on it. And it goes, and they always find a judge. Judge said, oh, there's a problem. So then it went to appeal. Then the appeal said, well, send it to the Florida Supreme Court to tell us what this means. And then the Florida says, hey, it's fine. So we won on that, and so there's zero basis for any federal court to do anything with our anti-rioting legislation. And so that is in effect, and we're going to continue to enforce that. But we're proud. We were the first state in the country to step up and do that. We also have created the Florida Law Enforcement Academy Scholarship Program, tuition and fees up to $1,000 of education expenses for trainees and enlisted law enforcement officers. Again, not a lot of places are doing that. We're proud to do it. We've also recognized that folks who are in law enforcement can help our communities. And so if you want to expand your families, you can get incentives for adopting from the state foster system, $10,000 benefit for adopting a child in need, or $25,000 if you adopt a child with special needs. And we've had a lot of people in law enforcement that have stepped up and taken advantage of that. We also have understood that we have an open border in this country. That's creating a host of problems. I'll talk a little bit more about that. But we see the drugs that are coming in, really dangerous drugs. You know, it used to be you bust somebody for methamphetamine or something, and you would do it. Now, you bust somebody with fentanyl, you could end up dying from being exposed to the fentanyl. And so we signed Senate Bill 718 this year, which provides criminal penalties for someone who exposes a first responder to dangerous substances in their possession. That's usually going to mean fentanyl when you're talking about these types of situations. We've also signed a lot of great bills this legislative session. SB 1036 increased criminal penalties for illegal aliens who return to the U.S. after being deported. HB 1451 prevented counties and municipalities from accepting IDs or driver's licenses issued to illegal aliens by outside jurisdiction. Look, if you want to have less illegal immigration, then don't provide benefits for illegal immigration. And so we've really been strong and led the nation on that. In places like California, they issue you ID, government benefits, all that. Well, of course you're going to have people that are going to go illegally and want to go for that. HB 1589 increased penalties on people who operate a vehicle without a valid license. And as I mentioned on the budget, we did do the scholarship program, or the signing bonus again. We also did $9.3 million to support efforts to combat opioid epidemic affecting Florida's communities. More than $17 million for the enhancement of important criminal databases, and there's a lot of different things that I know many of you have been concerned about. And then $40 million for enhanced 911 call services. And we tried to be very supportive when there were different line items, in the budget. I mean, I remember seeing, I was Cronus Chad here, are you here? Is this Hillsborough? There was I think it was $7.5 million for some rotary wing assets, and I had to gulp very hard before I gave the okay, because it's a lot of money. But we did, and we wanted to make sure that we were supporting law enforcement and all that. So I think if you look at our policies, promote law and order. Our actions support the men and women of law enforcement. Our budget provides funding, particularly where appropriate with some of the rural areas, to be helpful, and the results really speak for themselves. A couple other things that I think bear mentioning. One is, we have this Constitutional Amendment 3 that's going to be on the ballot in November, and it is basically an attempt by a Canadian marijuana company to use the Florida Constitution to give them an ability to have almost a monopoly on selling marijuana, which is just not the way policy should be done. But it also basically creates this really broad right to possess and smoke up to, I don't know, some law enforcement have told me 3 ounces, how many joints that is. Some say 40, some say 80, but bottom line, this is a lot. It has been tried. This happened in Colorado. Most people there regret that it happened. It happened in California. You smell it everywhere. New York, all these places. So the arguments were, when this happened in Colorado, was, look, people are going to use marijuana. And look, we have medical marijuana in Florida, and we have other people that do. I understand that. And that's not someone using marijuana like in their home is probably not something that law enforcement is going to view as a high priority given everything else we have. Having said that, the reality is this is something that was pitched as, because of that reality, if you legalize it, you can tax it, it's above board, it's safety, and it eliminates a black market. Why would you have it be a black market? Well, what's happened in Colorado, they have the biggest black market they've ever had. California has a big black market, and so it's actually led to way more drugs. It's led to more dangerous drugs coming in, and then when you have that, more people using drugs generally, there's going to be other drugs that the market is going to increase for. And so it just didn't work, and I understood the argument for it. It didn't work, and there's a lot of people there that definitely regret it. There's some people, like business owners. Some have said, well, I don't really like it, but I'll just tell people you can't do it in my restaurant or in my hotel. I don't think it's going to be that simple. I think this is written so broadly with no limitations that people are going to assert the right to be able to do this, regardless of what a private property owner said. If you have a public accommodation, yeah, maybe you can keep someone out of your home, but if you have a public accommodation, you're going to strip somebody of this broad constitutional right? It gets dicey. There's going to be litigation. There's going to be a whole host of things. And I would imagine law enforcement is not going to just want to deal with it at all. And so even if the business owner was right on the law, I would imagine most agencies are going to say, look, we're just not dealing with this given what's in the Constitution. So I don't think it portends very, very well for the state of Florida. We have a track record of this being done in other states. It just hasn't worked, and we just have to be honest about that. I think that defeating this, I think more people kind of get the negative that's happened, but I also think just there's people that when you read the summary, it doesn't tell you really what the amendment says. That's why it should not have been let on the ballot. I mean, the court's job is to not allow things on the ballot if the summary isn't an accurate reflection. And it really isn't an accurate reflection because it doesn't show. We have medical marijuana in the Constitution. Voters passed that. If you read the text of that, there's all these limitations. Like, okay, you can apply for a card, you can be restricted from, time, place, and manner. There's all these different things. This amendment, and you don't see the text of it, the voter doesn't see the text of it, they see the sanitized summary that's been poll tested in focus group, that eliminates, the actual text eliminates every limitation that was in the medical. And so, I mean, honestly, the right for the marijuana use is going to be a broader right than your First Amendment right to free speech, your Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms. I mean, it's ridiculous. So this isn't going to be good. It's not going to be good for law and order. It's not going to be good for quality of life. And so I know many of you are involved. I know the Sheriff's Association is helping to be able to combat Amendment 3, and I think we need to do that. We got to be rational about these things. And I have credibility on it because I came in, medical marijuana passed in 2016. I became governor in 2019. It really hadn't been implemented. And my view was like, look, I know some people, a lot of people like it. Some people don't. A lot of my voters didn't like it. But I'm like, this is the Constitution. I'm going to enforce it. So we did. And we've done that faithfully. And there's a lot of people that have used that. And I know not everyone is really in dire need medically. I mean, some people are in dire straits. Other people, have like a back spasm and they go in and get a card or something like that. So I know that's going on. But that's just the reality in Florida, that program has been implemented as the voters intended. And so I think we've struck a more moderate course on this. And I think what Colorado's done has been very extreme. I think a lot of people there regret it. I think California's been extreme. I think a lot of people there regret it. But why would we want a bigger black market for illegal drugs in this state? That is not going to end well for anybody. The other thing that I would point out is, look, I don't mean to be political, but I hear this stuff in wake of this weekend's news, where you have these very, very partisan liberal media saying, oh, Biden, what a great, unbelievable accomplishments and all this stuff. I'm just thinking to myself, opening the border is an accomplishment? Having 13 Americans get killed in Afghanistan with that disastrous withdrawal, inflation, all these other things. But perhaps two of the biggest failures are the open border and the Afghanistan fiasco. And there's actually a relation between both of those failures that I think affects our communities potentially. And it's just this. So there's a lot of folks who, in the wake of what happened in Afghanistan, these are people that had served in the global war on terrorism from 9/11 until very recently. They have contacts there. There were private citizens, like from Florida, that were helping rescue people out of Afghanistan. And how that went down was a real disgrace for the country. And of course, we lost 13 service members, but we also have created now a situation where these terror training camps are up and running. I mean, they're cycling through a lot of would-be jihadis over there. The U.S. government, I think their view is like, hear no evil, see no evil. And so that's bad. Maybe you could say, well, how does that affect us? If we had control of who comes into our country, maybe it wouldn't have a big impact on us. But our country has had 9, 10, 11 million people come in the last 3.5, 4 years. And I point out, we know terrorists have come in through the southern border. DHS will say that there's people who are on the terror watch list that's come through. And I remember saying that last year, and one of the media is like, oh, that is not true, all this other stuff. And now there have been people that have been arrested connected to ISIS and all these other stuff. And my view is you can't have 10 million people come in. You can't have a border that open and not have our enemies take advantage of it. Are we really to believe that this soft underbelly, that our people that want to do us harm would just say, no, we're not going to try to exploit that? Of course they're going to try to exploit that. So just talking with a lot of people in the community who've been involved in this, who still have contacts over there. They're not even in the government anymore. But their view, and I think this makes sense, is the training that's being done is not to do another 9/11 where you take down the equivalent of the World Trade Center. The training that's being done is to try to do another October 7th, like was done in Israel, where you go to some community and you have people, terrorists that are going to kill as many people as they can, and that creates risk for American communities. There's no question about that. So that's bad enough. But I think what even adds to it is a lot of the feds, they're being told in the bureaucracy, terrorism is the thing of the past. They're being told not to worry about it. I had somebody who was a targeting officer back in the day that just went on DHS websites like, okay, I think I suspect some terrorist activity, and this was in Florida, submitted it. And instead of them taking it and wanting to follow up, they sent back, you should talk to your local authorities. And they're like, who? And they said, the local division of emergency management. And I'm like, what? And that was what the U.S. government was telling somebody who was concerned. And I think part of this was testing to see how the response would be. I'm not sure, that it was necessarily something that was right per se. But the division of emergency management, look, we have great division of emergency management. There's no other state, you wouldn't want to be in a hurricane, but there's no other state you would want to respond than the state of Florida. And it's not just because we're doing things at the state level, it's because every county, a lot of these emergency management departments do a really good job. But counterterrorism is not something that they're charged with doing. Counterterrorism has always been something that the federal government really has taken the lead on, partially because they have the information, they get the intelligence that can emanate in foreign countries. You as a sheriff, you don't have intel coming in from Afghanistan to your sheriff's department. It's just outside your purview. But what that tells me, and what I've seen is, I think that they are acting like now the terrorism is really just a local issue. So this is something that we're going to have to step up and do more for, because since 9/11, it's really been the various federal alphabet agencies that have been taking the lead. And it was almost like if you wanted to do a lot locally, they would tell you, no, this is our purview. I think you've seen a shift over the last few years. I think some people just think the threat is no longer. I don't believe that. I think the threat is real. I think we've got a lot of soft targets now in this country. And so from the Florida perspective, I think what we want to do is say, okay, if they're going to abandon the field, then what do we need to do to be able to lean in and be aggressive if this were to come to our state and our communities? I mean, we do everything we can in Florida. I mean, we stop the boats when they try to come from like Haiti. We pass legislation to prosecute people who smuggle in illegals from the border, and the courts struck that down. We're appealing, but we've thrown the kitchen sink at this. The reality is people get across that border. Once the federal government turns them loose, they've got a lot of birth to be able to do a lot of bad things. And so I think the combination of what happened in Afghanistan with the open border, I think it presents a threat to this country. And I think the way the threat is going to be, again, is not to try to do one spectacular attack where you take down big landmarks. And maybe that would be part of it, but I don't think that's the primary. The primary is going to be, going into some community and just doing really, really horrible things. So be on the lookout for this. Understand that a lot of people in the federal government at this point are trying to move beyond terrorism. Look, I would move beyond it if it wasn't a threat. Yeah, fine. But when you have camps, when you have things that are happening, and you have an open border where you're not policing who's coming into your country, you have some serious, serious threats that you're going to have to contend with. And so, we may see some of this shake out differently over the next 6 or 7 months in D.C., as we get through this election, which I think would be welcome to see a change in posture. But in the meantime, I think the core responsibilities of local and state, as we've understood them since 9/11, I think are probably in need of a little bit of a change, and it's not going to be easy, and we don't get access to the information that the feds do. I mean, there's no way that a sheriff's department or a state agency is going to be able to do what a federal agency with access to information all over the world would be able to have. So it's a bad way that they're going, but I do think they're expecting the locals, and I think they're trying to say it's a local responsibility at this point. So just understand that, understand where we are. Hopefully nothing happens in the state of Florida, but clearly there's a lot of bad people out there. There's a lot of people that have bad designs for our country, and there'd be a lot of places in this state and in other states where they would love to be able to cause a lot of mischief and a lot of mayhem. So we want to be helpful at the state level. We're thinking things through about, okay, if the federal government's not going to be doing some of these core responsibilities, how do we work collaboratively together with local and state to be able to try to fill some of these gaps? I don't think physically we'll be able to fill all the gaps, or even most, just given that we're not getting the same information that they're getting, and we obviously are not in control of who's coming into this country the way they are, but I do think that there may be some opportunities for us to work together to protect our people, and we'll do what we need to do to be able to try to stay ahead of these things. But I just leave you with that because I do think it's going to be an issue. Somewhere in this country, there's going to be something that happens, and people are going to be able to point to the border, and I fear they're also going to be able to point to training that happened overseas leading up to someone coming across the border. We shouldn't be making it so easy for these people. It's a really, really bad set of policies that's been in place for the last many years. However, you guys are doing it right. We appreciate everything that you do. We appreciate everyone in your agencies. We appreciate the collaboration that our municipalities have with our sheriff's departments and both the municipal, county levels working collaboratively with the state of Florida. We're going to continue to lead by example, and we're going to continue to show everybody how it's done. Thank you all. God bless you.
Governor, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come here to the Sheriff's Conference. We certainly appreciate it. All you do for the sheriffs and our entire state, we're blessed that you're our governor. You are the GOAT. But as you know, in November, we'll have an elected sheriff in Miami-Dade County.
That's right.
We'll have 67 sheriffs in the state. So I want to present you a hat, Florida Sheriff Association hat that has 67 on it.
That is neat. Yeah, look at that. There you go. That is great. Coming to a golf course near you.
And speaking of that, I had the opportunity to go to the Governor's Cup last year, and we talked a little bit there, and I had a great time. And I presented the First Lady, Casey. She came here yesterday to speak to us about Hope, Florida, but I gave her a copy of the book I wrote several years ago. And I noticed the disappointed look on your face that I didn't have another one to give to you, so I want to present to you my book today.
Okay.
So thank you
Good
very
deal.
much.
Thank you. Thanks so much. All right.
What we're going to do now, we're going to take a break until 10:30. We've got some very important things to take care of at 10:30, so make sure you're back in here at 10:30. So, thank you.